Using commas, semicolons, and colons. As a writer, it is very important not just that you understand the basics of punctuation, but you can use punctuation to your advantage to set the tone and to improve the style of your writing. As we start, here is just a quick view of some of the most common punctuation that is used in your writing. In this particular lesson, we are going to be covering 3 of the most confusing punctuation marks: the comma, the semicolon, and the colon. So let's get started. When you are working with commas, there are many specific uses. One specific use is after an introductory phrase. So when we talk about an introductory phrase, we are talking about a phrase that will set the tone or give some additional detail. However, it does not necessarily contribute to the structure of the sentence. So in the example in front of us, I have, after the birthday party, the little girl was exhausted. So when we break this down, you have the introductory phrase. After the birthday party is what is called a dependent clause because it cannot stand on its own. However, it is setting the tone for the rest of the sentence. The complete thought is the little girl was exhausted. So you actually could have just the little girl was exhausted, but as the writer, I want you to know why she was exhausted. So you put in the introductory phrase, after the birthday party, you include a comma to set that phrase off from the rest of the sentence, comma, the little girl was exhausted. That detail is very important for the individual who is reading what you have written. You can also use commas as a way to set off interrupters or parenthetical elements. The student, I am happy to say, is adjusting well to the teacher. As the person who wrote the sentence, I found it easy to read it and to give emphasis where I needed to. However, to an individual not as familiar to the sentence, it would seem very confusing. What this sentence is doing is basically interjecting my thoughts into the sentence. So the actual sentence is the student is adjusting well. I am happy to say is something that I am interrupting the sentence with to share with you my thoughts as the writer. So when I am pulling that all together, it is very important to include those commas to show where I'm interjecting my own thoughts. The student, I am happy to say, enclosed in commas, is adjusting well to the teacher. I also could close, I am happy to say, in parentheses to make my point. Another example, my husband happily accepted the new job. In this case, this sentence is absolutely correct. If I want to let you know that my husband was very happy about the job he accepted, I can leave this as is. However, if I want to indicate to you that I, as the author, am the one who is happy, I would change the tone by adding commas. My husband, inside of commas, happily accepted the new job. So by doing so, I am giving you my thoughts on him accepting the job. So both versions in this case are correct. It just depends on the emphasis. And I also could enclose happily inside of parentheses. That is a matter of writer's preference. In theory, many experts feel that readers pass over things inside of parentheses. So if it is something that you want to be sure your reader reads, having those commas improves the chance that your reader will read it. But whether you set it off in commas or you set it off in parentheses, you are still letting your reader know that this is how you feel about your husband's new job. You can use commas with question tags. So what exactly is a question tag? In this example, we are taking a statement and turning it into a question. So the book is overpriced is a statement, and that very well may be factual. However, if I am not sure, I can add the question tag, isn't it? So now I have taken what was a statement and I have requested your input by adding a question at the end. So when I do so, the question is overpriced, comma, isn't it? So now instead of making a statement, I am asking you a question, and I would do so by setting it off with a comma. Commas can also be used with direct address. So what is direct address? Here in this first example, we have Mark, I left the keys in the office. Mark is the individual to whom I am trying to speak or to make a point to. So his name is in what I'm referring to with direct address. I left the keys in the office is a complete sentence. I do not need the direct address. However, if I am trying to get Mark's attention, I will set his name off with a comma so that it is as if I am calling his name and then making the statement. You also can have direct address in the middle of a sentence, so you will start and then in the middle you will sort of call out for that individual's attention. So I would start with have you, and then I would say a name, which is the direct address, and then finish my question. The actual question is, have you left for the meeting yet? However, because I may be speaking with more than one person and I want to know specifically what Jane has done, I would say, have you, comma, Jane, comma, left for the meeting yet? And then I am looking for a specific answer from one particular person. You also can use an appositive, commas with an appositive. So what exactly is an appositive? It is when you are providing extra explanation or extra detail so that your reader has a very clear picture of what you are talking about or who you are referencing. So in this example in front of us, I have my daughter Sydney is an employee at Allegheny Health Network. In this case, saying my daughter and Sydney is redundant. The subject of this sentence is my daughter, or it could be Sydney. That is the same person. So what I have done is I have taken this sentence to make it clear. I could say my daughter is an employee at Allegheny Health Network, or Sydney is an employee at Allegheny Health Network. Either one is absolutely correct. However, you as the reader may not know which of my daughters is an employee at Allegheny Health Network, or you as the reader may not know who Sydney is. So when I want to be very clear, I would say my daughter. Inside of commas or parentheses, I would include her name so that you know absolutely which of my daughters is the employee at Allegheny Health Network. Commas are also used for dates. When you are using commas for dates, we have 4 examples that just popped up. One, when you have the full date, you will always put a comma between the day and the year. And if you have additional text in a sentence after the year, such as we have after 2001, there is a comma after the year. So you are separating the date from the rest of the sentence with the comma. In the second example, in addition, I have added the day of the week. Then I have the month, the date, and the year. When you are writing the date this way, there is always a comma between the day of the week and the month. You continue to use the comma between the date and the year, and because the sentence continues after the date, I did put a comma after 1988 to continue the sentence. And in the final 2 examples, you do not use commas. So when you just have the month and the date, there is no comma. And when you just have the month and the year, there is no comma. Commas are also used before conjunctions. Just as a matter of clarity, a conjunction is a connecting word, and the most common conjunctions are and, but, and, or. And the golden rule when you are using commas and conjunctions, you are taking two individual simple sentences that could stand on their own as individual sentences, and you are using that comma and that conjunction to connect them. In the first example, we have Maggie is a good pianist, but she is an even better singer. So what we have done here is we've taken the first sentence, which is Maggie is a good pianist, and the second sentence, she is an even better singer, and we have decided to combine those two simple sentences so that I have some more complex sentences. So we have Maggie is a good pianist, comma, but she is an even better singer. The same rules apply when you are using the conjunction and. Here we have Sierra left early. She picked up Tori. We can use the comma and the conjunction to combine those two. So now you have Sierra left early, comma, and she picked up Tori. And finally, when you have or, you are taking the same concept of two complete thoughts, adding a comma and the conjunction or. In this case, the sentences on their own do not necessarily give the same final impression that they should. The boy will pass his math class. He will have to repeat third grade. So in this case, you almost need that conjunction to show how serious this is. So we have the boy will pass his math class, comma, or he will have to repeat the third grade. So those two individual sentences are grammatically correct. However, the meaning changes when you add the comma and the conjunction to combine those two thoughts. When you are writing, you don't want to put a comma between a complete thought and the conjunction when you do not have a complete thought that follows. So in my non-example, Brittany is a good teacher and director, that comma should not be there. Commas are used in a list. So when you are listing items, you will use commas to separate each of the items. We have Meredith loves to read, shop, and cook. As you are writing that so that your reader sees that they are separate, you would have Meredith loves to read, comma, shop, comma, and cook. If you only have two items in your list of things that Meredith loves, you would not use a comma. It would just be Meredith loves to shop. Meredith loves to read and shop. When you are using a comma in a list, the comma that comes directly before the conjunction is called the Oxford comma. Depending on how you were trained and educated, you may have been raised to believe that you always use that comma, or you may have been trained to never use it. I happen to be a fan of using it, and I will always add it when I am proofreading someone's paper. Commas can be used for non-restrictive clauses. My father, who has accomplished much, is up for a promotion. The actual key part of that sentence is just my father is up for a promotion. But as the writer, I decided to add who has accomplished much. So when I am writing that, I would consider who has accomplished much as a clause. It is not necessary to the sentence, however, it is a detail I want you to have. Therefore, I would set that clause off in commas. You also could set it off with parentheses if you chose, so that the reader understands what you want him to know about your father without changing the structure of the sentence. And finally, you can use, or you should use, commas with direct quotes and attributive tags. So what is an attributive tag? When you look at this first example, Rose asked, that is an attributive tag. What it is doing is it's letting you know who is asking where you have been. And when you have that sort of tag, you want to make sure you set it off with a comma. When you are writing, especially if you are writing to tell a story, and if you have a lot of dialogue, a lot of quotes in your story, you want to make sure that you are always including those tags so that your reader knows who is saying what. It helps them to paint the picture in their mind. So the first example has the tag at the beginning of the sentence. You also can have the tag at the end of the sentence. In that case, you would have the comma at the end of the quote, and then you would close the quotation marks. So commas always go inside of quotation marks. You also can have the attributive tag in the middle of your quote. So in this final example, you have, in the end, comma, Mark said we are all accountable. So the actual quote is, in the end, we are all accountable. The tag in the middle, Mark said, is important so you know who made the comment. And when you are breaking apart your quote, you need to make sure that both parts of the quote are enclosed in quotation marks, and you would have a comma after the first half and a comma after the tag stating who is making the comment. And as you will notice that in this example, the period is inside of the quotation mark, as periods always are. And typically, periods and commas are always inside of quotation marks. Question marks, exclamation marks, colons, and semicolons come on the outside of quotation marks, except in the first example, because the quote is in fact the question, you want to put the question mark inside of the quotation marks. Moving on, semicolons. Semicolons have two very specific uses. First one we will talk about is to separate items in a list. So we did talk about using commas to separate items in a list. However, when the items you are separating already have commas, you need to use semicolons to distinguish one item from the other. So in front of you, there are two examples. In the first one, we are talking about things that Sarah bought. So Sarah bought three things. She bought shiny red apples, she bought small sweet juicy grapes, and she bought firm pears. Because the shiny red apples and the small sweet juicy grapes already have commas, you need to put a semicolon between the first item and the second item, and between the second item and the conjunction, so that your reader knows where each of the new items begins. And in the second example, again, we have three locations where Brinley has been. And because you always put a comma between the city and the state, in order to separate one location from the other, you need to have a semicolon after the first two states to indicate that Las Vegas, Nevada is one location, Miami, Florida is a second location, and Boston, Massachusetts is the third location. You also will use or can use a semicolon to join two sentences. So in this example, we have that Rob went to the office today, semicolon, he needed to find the missing files before the meeting. We have taken two simple sentences, which are Rob went to the office today and he needed to find the missing files. Rather than having a writing consisting of nothing but short, simple sentences, you can combine those two related sentences by putting a semicolon between the first one and the second one. Another example, the instructions seemed rather clear, semicolon, however, many students were lost. Again, you could have two simple sentences that stand alone. The instructions seemed rather clear, however, many students were lost. But in order to improve my sentence variety, I would use the semicolon to join those two simple sentences. And finally, colons. When you are working with colons, there are two specific purposes that we will talk about. One is to announce, to introduce, or to draw direct attention to a list, to nouns, to noun phrases, to quotations, or to an example. In class, we covered many topics in our writing class. then a colon. The key with this is whatever comes before the colon, you need to make sure it is a complete thought. So we could say we covered many topics in our writing class, and we could put a period there, an end mark there, and it would be considered grammatically complete. However, I want to specifically list the things that have been covered. So to emphasize the list at the end of the complete thought, I put in the colon, and then I listed the skills from the class. Another example, my boss explained what I needed the most to grow professionally. That is a complete thought. However, I wanted you to know exactly which skills my boss emphasized. So I put in a colon and I listed those skills specifically. And if I want to set off a quote, Shakespeare said it best, with a colon, and then I have the quote from Shakespeare. In this third example, after best, I absolutely could have used a comma. However, for emphasis, I decided for greater division in my sentence or for greater accent of the quote to put in the colon. In the first two examples, you absolutely need to have a colon. You cannot use a comma or a semicolon. However, in the third example with Shakespeare's quote, you could use a comma where I have a colon. Some examples of what you do not want to do. If you have an incomplete thought before the colon, such as we covered many topics in our writing class, including, you want to take out that colon. That colon that you have there after including is incorrect. The colon that you see in the second example after such as is also incorrect. Words such as including and such as take what is before the colon and turn it into a dependent clause. Therefore, before your list, you need to delete those two colons so you just have a sentence that reads including grammar, vocabulary, style, and voice, or such as visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. You do not want the colon after those two examples. Colons can also be used to join sentences. Life is ever changing. You never know what will happen. With the colon separating those complete thoughts. John has built an impressive professional network, colon. He has many new contacts from his days on the golf course. Both of those sentences could have been written separately or they could have been joined many different ways, but using a colon between those two complete thoughts is definitely one of the options for joining your sentences. It's not always clear. When you are writing and when you are looking at writing and looking to combine simple thoughts, there are many different ways that you can use punctuation to create a variety of sentence structures. Typically, each method is correct and it is a matter of preference. So let's see some examples. Here we have two simple sentences. The boy went to the park. He played on the swings all afternoon. What you could do with this is you could use option one. The boy went to the park and he played on the swings all day with a comma before or after the first complete thought. Option two, the boy went to the park, semicolon, he played on the swings all afternoon. Or option three, the boy went to the park, colon, he played on the swings all day. All three of those options would be considered correct. What you want to avoid will be just putting a comma between those two complete thoughts. That creates what is called a comma splice. And you want to avoid no punctuation at all between those two complete thoughts. What you have created there would be a run-on sentence. Another example, John studied math all night. He still failed the test. Two very simple sentences. You could combine them different ways. You could say John studied math all night, comma, and he still failed the test. John studied math all night, semicolon, he still failed the test. John studied math all night, colon, he still failed the test. You could also write John studied math all night, Semicolon, however, comma, he still failed the test. All of those are correct ways to join two sentences. Again, what you want to avoid is no punctuation between those two complete thoughts to create a run-on, or just a comma. The comma is not enough division. You have created a comma splice. One final example, using a colon for a list. Incorrect, the skills that are needed for that position include. Remember, when you use the word include, you have now made what comes before the colon dependent, so you need to take out that colon. You also cannot use a semicolon in that position. The best way to write that would be to take out all the punctuation between include and the skills to have one complete sentence. Oh, we do have another example. So when you are faced with that list of items that already include commas, such as Morgantown, West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia, and Uniontown, Pennsylvania, remember you do need to use a combination of commas and semicolons to separate the items. So what you don't want would be just to have commas, because then it would look like Charity has lived in Morgantown and West Virginia and Charleston and West Virginia and Uniontown and Pennsylvania. What you need to do is to have a comma between the city and the state, and then to have that semicolon after the state so that your reader knows that you have concluded one location and now you're moving on to the next location. So let's practice. So the next several slides are going to, there will be a slide with a question or a request to choose the correct option. So I will give you time to read the slide. And then after you have had time to read the slide, we will move on and review the answer. If you selected D, you are correct. D is correct because you have 3 items in Robert's collection that already have a comma between them. So the list includes the album title and the artist. So in order to separate the album from its artist, you need a comma, and because each item already has a comma, then you would need the semicolon to separate item 1, which is Hotel California by the Eagles, from item 2, which is The Wall by Pink Floyd, and then from item 3, which is Abbey Road from the Beatles. So you want the comma within the item and then the semicolon to indicate that the item is complete. Number 2. If you chose C, you are correct. When you are taking 2 complete thoughts, such as John studied for the exam all night, he still failed the test. You need to avoid A, which is a comma splice, or B, which is a run-on, and you need to have something more definitive between those 2 complete thoughts, and that would be the semicolon. Number 3. If you select A, you are correct. So remember, when you are preparing to present a list, When you have a complete sentence, such as before school begins, I need the following school supplies. That is a complete sentence, although it doesn't necessarily tell you what the supplies are grammatically. That is a complete sentence. So when you have the complete sentence, you can end that complete thought with a colon, and then you can list the items that you need. When you are preparing to move from a sentence to a list, you do not want to use a comma like you have in B. You do not want to use a semicolon like you see in C, and you do not want to avoid any punctuation as you see in D. So you definitely want to use a colon as appears in A. And then finally, number 4, if you selected C, you are correct. In this case, again, you have a complete thought. Therefore, what you need is a colon in order to move from that complete thought to the actual list of the qualifications, which are effective communication and punctuality. In that example, you do not want to avoid any punctuation, which is what you see in A. A comma, which is what you see in B, is not enough. And D, a semicolon is not used to introduce a list. Therefore, D is not correct either. The best response is C. So I hope this has helped. If you struggle with this type of punctuation, you are not alone. These are 3 of the most challenging punctuation marks that there are. So good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.